There are many darknesses in life, and then there are lights. And you, my dear viewers, are one of the lights. The light of all lights. There, the nice stuff's out of the way. Now let's talk about blood and sex and violence. Hey, what's up, bookworms and creatures of the night? Mike back for some more Fright Fest to talk about the most iconic horror villain of all time, Dracula, from 1897 by Bram Stoker Dracula. This is the vampire book to end all vampire books, guys. I think that if you say, hey, actually Bram Stoker didn't create vampires. No, but he created the rules, I think, for what all vampire stories are based off of today. And it all started in 1897 with this epistolary novel. Is that what they call it? Epistolary? That's such a fun word. I always want to say Episcopalian. It's weird. Epistolary novel. And by the way, this is a very beautiful edition from Barnes & Noble. I've had a lot of people asking where I got this from. Barnes & Noble, leatherbound. It's got like these silver edges. Really, really sexy edition. But zero pictures. So if you're wanting, there's like an illustrated edition that has all the journal entries and stuff in it. I think that might be really, really just kind of atmospheric if that's what you're looking for. But just the text itself, I don't think there's a better edition than this. A little bit of background here. I read the book for the first time right before the 1992 movie came out. Kind of the same story I have with what I said about Frankenstein, which was, hey, that movie was coming out. I wanted to read the book before I do. I've always been like that. I always want to read the book before I see the movie, where it seems like everybody else, if they like the movie, they'll decide to read the book. No, I like to read the book first. That way I can complain about all the changes that are made, right? Not really, but that does kind of go hand in hand there. But very, very influential book, not only for me, but I think for society as a whole. It became one of my favorite books ever. I was like, I think 12 or 13 when I read it. And it kind of stuck with me. And I think it is one of the reasons that I have come to love the vampire genre before it went really, really sexy. So we'll talk about that here in a minute. If you watched my my Anne Rice video recently, you know how I feel about that. This is one of the books that kind of started me down that road to horror. This was before I read Stephen King, before I read H.P. Lovecraft. This was my introduction to horror. So it will always have a special place in my heart. Like I said, easily one of the most influential novels of all time. So much so that I feel like, 120 years later, people are still rewriting it for some reason. There are many, many things to talk about. But let's begin, as we always do, by talking about what is it about. Now, okay, Bram Stoker's Dracula. It tells the story of Dracula's attempt to move from Transylvania to England so that he may find new blood and spread his undead curse. Now, he finds a possible path there through Jonathan Harker, a lawyer traveling to Transylvania to help the Count purchase an estate in England. Now, as locals begin dying under suspicious circumstances, as well as rumors of them returning as the undead, thus begins the battle between Dracula and a small group of men and women known as the Crew of Light, led by Professor Abraham von Helsing. I'm sure you've heard of that before. It's just so fun to say Van Helsing, right? I don't know. Is that from the Dead and Loving It, the Leslie Nielsen movie? Mel Brooks? It's funny how, I think about Frankenstein, and now I think about Young Frankenstein by Mel Brooks, and now I'm thinking about Dead and Loving It. Mel Brooks, what a guy, right? So, guys, I think by now everyone knows this story. The thing is I think of the hundreds of movie and TV adaptations, I don't feel like very many have ever gotten it right. Yeah, Francis Ford Coppola might be about the closest, but even then, it had a lot more romance thrown in. But I'll talk about that here in a minute. Let's do as we usually do. Let's get into the good and the bad. Like I already said, this is told in epistolary format, something that I actually appreciate. I know I've talked about how Michael Crichton did that with Eaters of the Dead, and I felt like it was kind of an homage to this. But I felt like Bram Stoker was doing it before it was cool, right? I feel like a lot of people do that now. Like I just talked about when I talked about The Hunger recently, she tried to do stuff like that. It just didn't work. With this, I feel like it works. If you don't know what that means, the story is told through newspaper articles, journal entries, letters, shipping manifests, things like that. And it's all like it's evidence compiled together to tell the story. And that bothers a lot of people, but I actually found it quite compelling the way that it was done. I had never heard of anything like that when I read this for the first time. So I felt like this is the original found footage kind of story, right? I feel like the horror genre has done that so much in film now. because it's so cheap to make. But with this, it was obviously that wasn't why it was done that way. I think it adds to the realism of it. And you never have to worry about, oh, this is a first-person narrative being told by unreliable narrator, because it's all told by several different characters and several different viewpoints. So I think that kind of adds to helping build the little world a little bit better here, and it also gives us several different point of views to see what horrific things are happening from everybody, believers and non-believers alike. It really does kind of set the tone here. This is the classic tale of good versus evil, and you think about the time period and you think that's really all it was. There's no anti-heroes yet. There's no gray characters or whatever. You have your very clear light versus the dark here, and it's never in question. Like I said, the time period you're talking about, it's never in question if the good guys are going to win. The question with this book is, what's it going to cost? How many sacrifices, how many lives is it going to take to win this battle? And I think that is the root of the story here. You got your good versus your evil, and again, you're never ever thinking, well, Dracula's going to find a way to win this. It's how many is he going to take with him on the way down. And I don't think that's a spoiler, guys. I think that kind of, like I said, I feel like everyone knows this story by now. One thing you've heard me say consistently during Fright Fest this year is a lot of these older stories is the characters are really underdeveloped. You're just told you're supposed to be on their side. They're the good guys. I'm just going to shake the book at you and say they're the good guys. That's it. That's all the reason you know why. I don't feel like that's a problem here. I feel like all of these characters are actually developed really well, and you can, not only do they seem different, but you actually have a reason really to root for these characters. I really do. I feel like Jonathan, you got Van Helsing, Quincy, Mina, Lusa, Renfield, Arthur, Dr. Seward. They all feel important here. It never once where I'm like, who is this guy now? Oh, okay, this is character A, this is character B, it's just lambs to the slaughter. You never feel like that. They all have a reason to be there, and it makes you actually give a damn about them when you're heading into the final fight there. So it's really a good job when I felt like no one was really doing that in this genre at the time. I really do feel like he's able to make these characters not only seem different, but make them seem important, to make you actually care when one of them doesn't make it, so it's really very different from a lot of the other stories. And this is a little longer, a lot of the ones I talk about with that, they are 30, 40 page stories. This is about 300 pages, depending on how big your font size is. So there's plenty to kind of latch on to a few of these characters. Like, I really like Quincy a lot. Quincy was a lot of fun, but again, it's really just going to depend on you, what you're kind of looking for. But again, if you're wanting some actual serious depth of the character, I won't say you get like serious depth, like you're not finding out like their childhood and things like that, but I'd say I feel like there's enough there that you'll actually care about these characters. Another positive for me, and this is because I'm a sadist apparently, is it does not shy away at all from the sex and the violence in the story. And you think when you got vampires, you got dismemberment, you got decapitation, you got blood sucking, obviously there's going to be some violence. But again, you think about the time period, and I'm actually surprised he got some of the stuff that he was able to get out there during that time. The violence can't be toned down, I don't think, in a story like this. What I'm really surprised about is the sexiness and the allure of vampirism. There isn't any actual sex scenes in the book, but I think every single blood-sucking scene here really is a stand-in for those sex scenes. Tell me, read the Brides of Dracula, meeting Jonathan Harker, and tell me that is not a sex scene. Come on. It is very, very erotic. So it's in a way that I feel like, okay, this is the way I can slip this really, really randy sex scene in here and get it past the censors by just making, oh no, it's okay. They're getting their blood sucked. They're getting slowly murdered. But it very much is a stand-in for those things that you couldn't really get out there at that time. And what I find compelling is that the characters are just as repulsed as they are kind of turned on by the idea of being fed upon, and that's just some dark stuff. I tell you, there's a lot of sexual repression, I think, in this book, and I think this is where it all came from. This is where it came from, that vampires were just ultimately sexy. We'll talk about that when I get to the movie here in a minute. But in a way that, like, you can't resist, not just that, hey, they're a hunk or something, or wow, she's just a knockout. It's nothing like that. It's just that, like, they have this allure that you cannot resist. And again, this is where a lot of those rules, I think, were established. So, yes, I know he isn't the first to do all these things. I'll have a dozen comments below about how blank did this first and blank did that first. This is the most popular one. This is the one that I know, so that's the one that I'm sticking with. I feel like he started a lot of stuff. There are a couple of bad things here. Many do not like the epistolary storytelling method. If that's something that you're not into, yeah, this might be a difficult read for you. A very good friend of mine, I was excited when he was reading this, and he hated it. He hated it because he didn't care for how it was structured. And yeah, the structure can be a problem. You know, a lot of these letters and manifests and logs and things like that, they aren't always in sequential order. So you're kind of trying to piece things together. To me, that adds to the mystery. I'm trying to fill in these blanks here the whole time. But for others, they're just wanting a straightforward story. This isn't it. You're not going to get that here. But I think you're going to not have any problems where you're like, well, this doesn't make sense here. That doesn't make sense like that. It really, that isn't a problem for me. But again, I can see that complaint for sure. I don't really have very many other bad things to say. People want to know my fear rating on this. I probably do it about a 7 because there are some things that are, even for the time period, they're pretty messed up. Again, nothing that's going to have you like, hiding under your covers or anything like that, but more of a, wow, I can't believe he was able to get away with this during the time period that he wrote it. And I always say you have to look through it under that microscope of when these books were released and to see how much he was able to get away with here by, changing a few words around to replace certain things with other things. But yeah, I don't have a ton of bad things to say about it. So I'm just going to go ahead and start about why you should read it. This is the granddaddy of all vampire books. I keep saying I know he wasn't the first to do it, but this is the one that everyone who got interested in writing or reading about vampires read or was told about by their parents or told about by their grandparents. This is the one that you should read. This is the one that you should watch. Now, it's been adapted numerous times. I don't feel like any of the adaptations have ever gotten it right. The closest, I believe, that I've seen is the 1992 Francis Ford Coppola one. That one, it's here's what I'm gonna say why you should read this. Say you love that movie and you want it, but you want it with a little less romance. This is not a romance book. That movie was very much a gothic romance. It was fine. But again, with this, Mina isn't quite as taken by Lord Dracula as she is in that movie. It isn't quite as it's a little more. You read it, you'll see. So you're wanting more of just a straight gothic horror story. This is going to be what you need to read because that movie, I think, really did usher in the age. I know I gave Anne Rice a lot of this credit last week, but I felt like that movie is kind of what made Anne Rice start to be like, hey, if I make my vampires sexy, people eat that shit up. And I really think that movie is to blame for where vampires went to. From instead of eating you, they started dating you. So, yeah, I really think that movie is where that began. So I like the movie, but I'll also sometimes be like, you bastard, look what you did. I don't know. Many might disagree with that. They might point out some vampire romance novels that I didn't know about. But anytime you talk about this, it's always going to fall back on Twilight. No, nothing like that. I just really think Anne Rice was like, at that time in the early 90s, was still the gold standard of current vampire novels, and that was when I saw her shift in her storytelling start to change a little bit into making the vampires just like overly sexy. So yeah, not only did you ruin Anne Rice, you ruined the whole genre, guys. So anyway, it's still a good movie. I'm going to watch it again. Awesome soundtrack, by the way. I actually listen to that soundtrack now when I read this book. So, and I've read this book 3 times in my life. So I was going to read it again this year, but I just kind of ran out of time. But I can't say enough about why you should read it. Much like what I said about Mary Shelley, it's important, I think, to read the titans of the genre, and he is definitely one of them. And you know what? This collection even has more stories that Mr. Stoker wrote besides just Dracula, and there are a few good ones in there that I'd like to talk about. Maybe next year's Fright Fest. I don't know. We'll see. So again, you like the movie, you like vampires, you want to know where it all started? Guys, this is the place that you should start. Now, if I've got any final thoughts here, like I said, this was my gateway into horror. This is what got me first interested in the genre. So I'll always credit that first trailer I saw for Dracula, and I was like, oh, he's not just a little cartoon character or something like that. At the time, all I think I seen him doing was like Scooby-Doo or something. But it was one of those things where I was like, okay, I could get down with that. I want to read that. And my parents were kind of like, I don't know about this, but then they're like, you know what? You can check it out at the public library, and it's in the classics section, so it's fine by us. So I was able to get that past my parents, and that's what got me to where I am now. So this will always be a very special book to me, and I feel like being able to pass that down to the next generation is really cool. My kid at the time, I'm going to show you some old pictures here. It was 2004. My oldest son then was about to turn 3. And he had watched, I think, Hotel Transylvania, I believe that's what it's called, and he absolutely loved Dracula in that. So he asked for Halloween that year if me and some of my other friends would dress up as some of the horror monsters. So he wanted me to be Dracula, another friend to be the Wolfman, another friend to be the Invisible Man, and another friend to be Frankenstein. I don't have a picture of that. But it was a really fun time, and just making that come true for him. And I'm not going to lie, being fitted for actual professional things is pretty cool. I couldn't dig them up for this review. I tried to find them. I couldn't find them. But if anything with me, I don't do very much of the cosplaying. But when I do it, I usually like to try to go for it. And even for just a Halloween thing like that. Making Halloween special for my kids is always something I'm going to be on board with. And being, the horror icon that I consider Dracula to be, that the world considers Dracula to be, was a lot of fun. So guys, that is why this book is so important to me. It's why I think that you should read it, and I think that you'll have a great time with it as long as you go in prepared, knowing about that storytelling format that Mr. Stoker uses. So of all of the classics I've talked about this month, this is by far my favorite. Over Lovecraft, over Shelley, over Blackwood. This is my jam. I love this story so much, and I can't wait to share it with my hopefully when they get a little older, they'll be into reading like I am. Right now, they're still like, I'd rather just play with my iPad. But, hopefully they'll get into reading it. I will definitely push this story on it because I think it's one that has lasted as long as it has because of the strength in those words. So, guys, have you read Dracula? What did you think? Drop in the comments and let me know, you creatures of the night.